So this is the SM Tracy Herbarium. It is part of a gigantic warehouse building that Texas A&M owns. It's housed within the Ecology and Conservation Biology department. And in front of the herbarium, we have a very nice native plant garden. So we might take a closer look at some of the species they have here. We've got Panicum virginica, which is going to be switchgrass. We've got a whole big clump of that. This all used to be Johnson grass, so they've done a great job of taking out the invasives and putting in native species just in the last few years. We've got Poaceae, Vaccalia farnesiana. So this is just a native shrub, Fabaceae shrub. So legume, it's got its compound leaves, just very nice there. We've got some very nice rock pavonia. There's a lot of Maximilian sunflower over here, Helianthus maximiliani. This one is very aggressive, so you can see it's just spreading pretty naturally just down the ways, and it gets very tall. Now, this one here has got to be almost 10 feet tall. So I'm 6 feet, and this is where I'm at, and it's still got several more feet to go. So very cool plants here. But this is a very desirable native species. Maximilian sunflower is a really good one for wildlife. And then even, I don't know if this is intentional, but even just around that, we have all this orse herb, which is another good ground cover native. And we have some Asclepias, some milkweed that are doing really well. So that is another cool find. But this is just the little native plant garden that has been promoted in front of the herbarium. But let's take a look inside and show you what's going on inside the herbarium. Along with my environmental consulting business, I'm also a research associate at the SM Tracy Herbarium. So I thought I would make a little video to show what the herbarium does, what it is, what goes on here, what kind of research is going on, and what I kind of do to help support the herbarium's mission. So let's go ahead and go in. This is the SM Tracy Herbarium, and let's take a look. So this is the inside of the SM Tracy Herbarium. Now, just looking at it like this, there's not a lot to see. So here you can see we've got hundreds and hundreds of cabinets all over the place. And these cabinets are sorted by family, and then by genus, and then by species, and then even by location. So depending on where they were collected, what continent. We actually have plants from every continent in this herbarium. So just to give an overview of what the herbarium looks like, we have over 300,000 specimens in here. Several of the past curators have been grass specialists. So we call those agrostologists. So if you look, this is the main hallway, and we have many cabinets on the left and right, and the entirety of this right side is going to be your monocots, which is primarily your grasses. So grasses were very heavily collected by the past directors of the herbarium. However, there are all sorts of plants that we can find from all over the world coming all together in this invaluable place to study botanical knowledge and bio distributions of these plants, biogeography. You can use this for genetic research. You can just do all sorts of very interesting research with all the information that is here. So let's just take a quick look into one of these cabinets. So I'm not picking any one in particular, but when you go and look at it, we've got a few different major categories. Of course, monocots, dicots, and then we have gymnosperms would be separate, so that would be like your pines and then we also have pteridophytes, so ferns and things like that. But this is Poaceae, so the grass family, and this is Stipa. This is like a needle grass is the genus. So we've got the genus Stipa from Latin America all the way to Trichloris pluriflora. which was collected in Texas. So let's just take a closer look. And in each one of these cabinets, we have thousands of specimens, thousands of individual specimens. So let's just take a closer look here. So here we have Texas trichloris. So this would be the genus. So we take this out, and with these herbarium specimens, sometimes we have some that are extremely old. And so that makes them very fragile and very valuable. So we want to be very careful with these specimens. Don't want to damage them in any way, and you want to use them only for legitimate scientific purposes. But in this case, we usually have a label. So we have plants of Texas, Trichloris crenata, Duval County, 5 miles north of Freer. And then the collector and his collection number, and he was with Michigan State University doing some collections in Texas. So this is a pretty decent specimen. There are much better specimens and there's much worse specimens, but this one is pretty complete. It's unfortunately, we can look at the date down here, and it's going to be February. This is not a great time to be collecting grasses, so you can tell that this is last year's seed head, and we're actually missing a lot of the seeds from last year, so they're all starting to fall off. You can see some have fallen off right here. But that is also why we have this little seed packet. So that is actually full of seeds. So people, botanists and citizen scientists and anybody that collects for a herbarium is getting these plant specimens and collecting this very important data. This is a very limited label. These days it's much easier to get a lot of data very quickly. In fact, it's usually very important that you get geographic coordinates, because that is very helpful for refinding some of these species. And with our phones in our pockets, we can actually find that immediately. This was collected in 1935. So they didn't have that available back then. So it was a lot harder. You had to hand type all these on a typewriter back then. So it was much harder to make labels. These days we can use software to make labels and get our geographic coordinates and just get a lot more information much more quickly, but still create a good plant specimen. So that's just one example. Go ahead and put this back. So like I said, the last few directors of the herbarium were grass specialists. However, the current curator of the herbarium is Dale Cruz, and he is a bryologist, which means he is focusing his research on bryophytes, which are mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. So his goal is to create a book called The Mosses of Texas, and currently he has collected thousands of mosses across the state, and those are a bit different in the way you collect them. In fact, I have a big stash of mosses here that I've collected recently, just in boxes and in packets that I still need to go through and actually put into the collections. But if we go look at some of the collections he has, this is the cryptogamic collection, so this would be mosses, liverworts, lichens, things like that. But this is where the moss research happens. So we've got some very specialized equipment. We've got lots of microscopes and things like that to look at these things much more closely. And because these things are so small, you have to look at them through a microscope to be able to correctly identify them. So this is an old school method of collecting mosses, where you would glue them just like you would glue a plant onto this paper. However, mosses require close dissection and microscopy to be able to identify correctly. So this is actually not supported any longer to glue the plants down. It's much preferred to keep them in little packets like this, where you can open them up and they will actually be loose inside the packet, and you're able to handle them carefully and look at these collections, look at these mosses under a scope without damaging them or pulling them off and ripping them off the paper if they're glued down. So this one actually has lichens and moss just on tree bark. So very interesting collection here. But that's how you would collect mosses. And Dale Cruz, the current curator of the herbarium, has a Texas Bryology website. So if you'd like to learn more about mosses or how to collect them and to even contribute the mosses into our collections here, then check out texasbryology.com or .org. I'm not sure on that. I'll make sure to put the correct one in this video. But this is how the bryophytes are currently stored. So here we have little packets where they are still loose, like I showed you, but we have the label. We have Flora of Poaceae County, Illinois, and it's got the name of the plant, it's got, the description of where it was, and then it actually has the plant right here. This one was from 1950. So we actually have lots of old specimens of plants, mosses, etc. In fact, these days, there's very little collections being made anymore. There's just not nearly as many people that take the time to make physical plant collections. And that is really quite a shame because it's such a great way to contribute to science. But this over here, we've got some very historical collections, and these are extremely interesting. So these are anything that's collected prior to 1870. So back then, or maybe not in the 1870s, but in the 1900s, and throughout Texas anyway, there was a lot more collections being made. So most of our collections actually happen to come from anywhere from the 1940s up until the 1990s. And a lot of those are just going to be much more heavily collected years than we have these days. Used to, for taxonomy classes, you would collect plants every year as part of assignments, and those would all be added to this herbarium, because the director, Dr. Hatch or Dr. Gould, was the one teaching those classes. The director of the herbarium would teach plant classes, and so all the collections being made, if they were good, would be added to the herbarium at the end of the year, and that information would be stored in perpetuity. Kind of jumping ship a little here to move on to a little bit of a different topic. These are the oldest collections we have at the herbarium. So this, before we look at the label, just want everybody to look at this plant closely and see, especially if you live in Texas, you should probably recognize this plant. It's not in the best shape. And in fact, it's very, very old, so the coloration is a bit different. But if you look very closely, we actually have a little bit of purple here, and it was in fact more of a blue when it was alive. And we can see these 5 leaflets growing down at the base. So we can assume that it was a Fabaceae, but in particular, this is a bluebonnet. And this is actually the first collection we have from Texas. In it's hard to say for sure what year it was here, but we're assuming it was 1888 is the year that we have here. It's not quite certain with this mark on it, but maybe we can assume that 1888 is when this was collected. But interestingly enough, Texas bluebonnet was not the state flower at that time. It wouldn't become the state flower for many more years. But it's just kind of cool that our oldest Texas specimen here at the herbarium is a bluebonnet, our state flower. Number 2 we have here. This one is our oldest specimen, or again, what you think to be one of our oldest specimens. So this here says 1880 something. However, this is a newer label. If we look at the older label, we can see that this was actually collected in 1816. So we have a grass here from France, of all places. This must have been a trade. Herbariums often trade with each other just to spread the diversity out and be able to house these different species in different locations throughout the world. But we have this little plant grass species that was collected in France in 1816 in Paris. and I don't know how to speak French or read French, so I don't know what the rest of this says, but the date is pretty clear, 1816. So this is our oldest known specimen. Well, from a few years ago, we would have thought this was the oldest. However, if I remember correctly, I think we have found some older ones. Oh, actually, would be the same thing, or just slightly newer, actually, 1818. So Festuca uniglumis, 1818, so another grass specimen. So these are just some of the oldest specimens we have here at the herbarium, and they're just really interesting to see. And we have many, many collections from early Texas expeditions in particular. So things that were collected early on in the development of our state and country. And so that's just another cool piece of history. Not only is it very interesting botanically to see what species were here back then, but also we're able to see just historically how were people exploring across our state. In fact, Lindheimer, Ferdinand Lindheimer, is considered the founder of Texas botany, and these are all his collections here. And he has more collections than just here. He has collections all in different herbaria, but we house a handful of his collection. And that's very significant because he was here before the founding of the Republic of Texas, which was its own nation. And so it's very, very cool to see some of these species here. So this is Lindheimer's collection. He collected this Zygodanus natalii, this poisonous species here in 1849, maybe during, before, or slightly after the founding of the Republic of Texas, and then it would have become a state just a few years later. And just to see this history through the plants is just such an interesting lens to look through. And without these herbaria, we wouldn't be able to do that. Just to look at another aspect of the herbaria, of this herbarium in particular, we have a wood collection. So up here we've got this giant collection of slats of wood. And if you look closely, each one of these has a species on it. So wood collections are quite unique in that they can help you figure out what the qualities of wood are for agricultural purposes, for timber purposes. And then you can also come and check and see, even if you have a dead tree, you can come and identify what that tree is. So another useful tool of the herbarium, or another useful service, I should say, is that herbaria are wonderful places to be able to identify plants. If you have a plant that you don't know what it is, coming to the herbarium and comparing it to known specimens are going to be a great way for you to see if you can figure out what you have. So we have lots of different species here. These are all numbered, so they correspond to a number, and then we have a catalog of what species all these plants are, and then some of them have labels on them. So this is just another interesting aspect, having these wood collections. Then we also have collections of illustrations. So these are botanical line drawings, botanical paintings, things like that. And I'll just look at a couple of them here just to show you what we have. Let's see here. I'll just get this one out right here. And if we pull this out, these are going to be original drawings for different species. So here we can see we've got Typha domingensis, which is a cattail. So this was a drawing probably used in a book. Most of these are used in specific books. This is probably a wetland book of some kind, and these all have the descriptions of the different parts, which is very useful for a field guide. And you can see that we have the original line drawing here. So you can see the rhizomes very clearly. The author or the illustrator of this, you can see even on the leaves, you can see all clearly all the dots which are prominent in person as well. And you can see the little fuzzy corn dog that you see typically on typha or cattails. So the female part and the male flowers up here. So very interesting. We have a large collection of these botanical illustrations, and they're extremely valuable as well. Sometimes botanical illustrations show us the important characteristics that we're looking for to identify plants even better than what a specimen might do. Because a specimen, you're just collecting whatever you can find, however the plant looks at that one point in time. However, what an illustrator, a good botanical illustrator, can do is take many specimens and find out what are the key characteristics that make this species what it really is. And so they're able to really valuably show what are the key characteristics, and they can make them very clear. So this rhizome here is a very distinguishing factor to know that it's a cattail. And they can clearly show that here, where in a specimen, you might not have a clear version of the cattail, or maybe the flower wasn't in bloom, but when you're botanically illustrating, you can show some of these main characteristics no matter what time of year you collected the plant. You can compile all those good specimens and pick the best traits to signify in your drawing. So that's just another important aspect that this herbarium holds. Another unique characteristic of this herbarium is that we happen to have one of the largest fungariums in the state. So a fungarium is going to be fungi or mushrooms. So this is just a little poster about mushrooms we have here, but this is the workstation for our resident research associate mycologist, Dave Lewis. And David Lewis is an extremely renowned mycologist, mushroom expert. And here we have a dehydrator. This one, I think, oh yeah, it's actually full of my specimens. So these are just going to be a lot of different mushroom specimens that we collect here. You dry them out, you bag them up, get the details on them, get detailed descriptions of where they grew, what was growing with them, things like that. And we have a collection of several thousand mushrooms, slime molds, and things of those variety. And they're just extremely interesting. So we've got a whole collection for that as well. So mushrooms are just as important as plants. In the past, we thought mushrooms were plants, but we've since realized that they're actually closer related to animals. But herbaria still remain one of the best places that we can house these specimens for future use. So biogeographical uses or genetic uses, things like that. So here, just showcasing a new initiative that the herbarium has been doing. So Daniel, excuse me, Daniel Spelink has been our new director for probably the last 5 or 6 years or so. And he is mostly a geneticist or a biogeographer. And he helped make a grant to digitize our collection. So basically what that means is that we take extremely detailed, high quality pictures. So this is just a big camera setup, and we take these high quality pictures of our specimens. So we take the plant specimen, we put it into this little tray. It's a little dirty right now, but the plant specimen sits on top of all this. And then we get a very nice detailed picture, and we're able to put all this data, we'll take a very good photograph and get it onto an online database. And that is just a great way to share some of the data that we have in this herbaria. So we're able to share the location information through the label. We have a process of where we put the label online and have volunteers help us type up the label and make sure that it's correct. And then we're able to get all that information online, and people are able to use it all across the globe in different research questions. So this is just this is just a brief glimpse of what this herbarium does and how useful it is. It's just such an amazing tool for any sort of ecology research, any sort of plant research, botanical research. If you want to know what used to grow in your area, this is the way to know. If you want to know, like, what did the landscape look like, what species grew here before it was degraded, or before it turned into a development. Like all these cities that we have across Texas didn't exist when Ferdinand Lindheimer was scouring across Texas looking for all these new plant species. Most of these cities did not exist. So when he was collecting, he was probably collecting in many places that have since turned into just a parking lot and don't have any botanical use any longer. But this is just a glimpse into the past and into the future. With all this genetic research, there's just so much that can still be done with all these plant specimens. And that's just why herbariums are so important. Another aspect of the herbarium, and probably one of the last ones I'll show you, is that we just have a vast botanical library. So Dale Cruz, the current curator, has his own library locked up in his office, which is just as vast as this one. But we have plant books, and some of them extremely old and invaluable plant books. So these are all just from Texas. We've got a lot of Texas plant books right here. Yeah, so all this entire shelf is just Texas plant books. So we have many like theses of here are the plants of a certain area. So vascular hydrophytes in 8 central Texas counties. You know, very specific. Back in the 60s, well, throughout the 1900s, there was just a lot of studies of floras like these. So people would just go out and collect as much as they could, and that would be their master's thesis. And just to publish what they could find in certain areas. So there's lots of these, lots of theses like that. A vascular flora of Robertson County. So just a lot of those, a lot of old thesis material. But then there's also a lot of wildflowers of Texas, so more of a field guide. They aren't comprehensive floras by any means, but we also do have some comprehensive floras. Manual of the Vascular Plants of Texas. This at the time was meant to include all the species that they knew of growing in Texas, but just lots of different things. We've got grasses, we've got specific regions, so big thicket. We've got trees of central Texas, northern Texas, trees and shrubs of the hill country. So it just kind of goes on and on. And then we also have books from all over different states. So these are just in order by state. Flora of Alaska, Manual of Flowering Plants of California, the Jepson Manual, Gardens of Hawaii, just all sorts of different things. Flora of Missouri. So it just doesn't seem to end how many plant books we accumulate and keep here at the herbarium. And they're invaluable for trying to figure out what plant do we have when we're trying to ID something. And here we have the flora of North America. So this is meant to be a complete key and a complete flora of all the plants in North America, north of Mexico. And it is still not complete. We have many, many volumes here, but there's still several volumes that just have not yet been published. So that is still getting added to. But this is just a place that I worked throughout my undergraduate career. I worked as just an assistant, and then I was just documenting plants. I was just typing up labels, basically. I would type up what I saw on old labels that hadn't been put into any sort of database, and then I would put them on an online spreadsheet, and we would just get that data available and out to the public. So I did that as an undergrad, and I assisted in all sorts of just upkeep of the herbarium. I would help glue specimens. I would freeze them. So when plant specimens come into the herbarium, they have to be frozen before they do anything else, because there's always a possibility of insect infestation, and we don't really want that to happen. So I when we get new specimens in, we have to put them in a freezer that usually goes, I think it's negative 80 degrees Celsius or something crazy like that. It's just a very, very cold freezer to make sure that any insects, any biotic problems, anything that might infest some of our specimens and degrade the quality of our specimens are going to be killed before they come in and before they're able to invade. We do have issues with insects and beetles and springtails, things like that, actually coming into the herbarium and eating some of the specimens. Some of them from many, many years ago have just been destroyed in some cases because it's so hard to keep these bugs from coming in and killing them. So one of our best tools for eradicating those insects or making sure that they don't have a chance to keep breeding is to freeze them at extremely low temperatures, and then they won't be able to survive through that. So that's what I did as an undergrad, is just general assistant curator things. So I would just help Dale Cruz, the curator, just with whatever was needed at the time. And then after I got a little more advanced in my plant learning, I started to get hired as a research botanist for the herbarium. So we took trips across the state and got to do lots of different plant collections. We would go to new counties and try to get new county records. There were some ranches or properties that would want full floristic inventories of their property. And so our herbarium would go out and through different times throughout the year and collect everything we could find. And then we would document it all and add all those specimens, anything we collected, we would add to the herbarium here. So that was a really cool job. And that's when I really realized, like, oh man, I would really love to do this sort of thing for a full career. And I still get to do that now. And now as I'm going through my PhD and have my own consulting business, with ARC Ecological Consulting, I'm able to still go out to a lot of private properties and do some consulting, help people with wildlife and livestock management decisions. And then I'm also still able to go out and collect plants, because if you can't tell what the plants are on a landscape, you don't know the health of the landscape. You don't know the history of that landscape. But if you know the plants, you can start to understand, if these plants are growing here, well, I know this is a very healthy rangeland, or I know that this is very good species of plants for certain wildlife, or I know that this plant is actually a sign that the land is very degraded. So knowing your plants is essential for being able to read your landscape and know how to manage it appropriately for your goals. And being a research associate here, I'm able to work closely with Dale Cruz and the current herbarium staff and be able to collaborate. And we always have projects going on of how can we find new plant species in new places that they haven't been found before, and how can we go to new places and collect new things. What sort of research can we come up with? Like, what sort of questions do we need to ask and try to solve through what we can add to the herbarium? And that it's just such a rewarding work to be able to be a research associate here. It's a volunteer position, but it's a very significant position that I've been very grateful to be added as a research associate here at the herbarium. And I'm very grateful for my time here. It really got my start in botany because of this herbarium, and I just couldn't express enough how important herbaria are. And if you're interested in learning more about herbaria, there's several herbaria throughout Texas, and so find your local one and just reach out. They're always looking for volunteers. They can never get enough volunteers. We have so many specimens, even from still the 1950s onward, that just haven't even been added to the collection yet. They're still sitting in plant presses just because we don't have enough volunteers, enough manpower to add all these specimens to their collections as quickly as we'd like to. So they're always looking for more people to be able to help and get these important projects done. So just reach out, and you can always collaborate. You can reach out to me and specifically, and I would be happy to help out with any sort of questions you have about herbaria. Feel free to comment down below if you have questions or just want to know anything else. I would love to make more videos. If any of this is really of interest, I would love to share more about specific details. This was a really broad overview of the SM Tracy Herbarium, what we do, where we are, how we function, and I would love to get a little more detailed if there's interest of what people want to know about this amazing place. So thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe, and see you next time.